The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Sort of following up generally on the topic of guns in schools, we've learned about an Illinois school police officer effectively, who stopped an armed teenager at a high school Wednesday morning, according to the local police chief, who applauded the officer for saving potentially countless lives. It was a 19-year-old suspect who fired several shots near a gym at Dixon High School, and the school resource officer reported the incident to authorities, confronted the gunman, and was able to stop the guy who started to run away despite shooting several rounds at the officer. The officer returned fire, hit the gunman, and there were no life-threatening injuries at all as a result of this. And he is being called a hero. And this is once again raising the question about, well, listen, what about places that don't have a school resource officer? What about having a teacher with a firearm who could have done the exact same thing were they not equipped with a school resource officer like this guy? And of course, the truth is, teachers are experts in teaching, not in stopping armed gunmen. So I don't see how this story proves that arming teachers is a good idea. It seems like two different things.
No, I don't think we should arm teachers, but there's definitely a case to be made that we should have school resource officers in every single school, maybe even a couple of them. And, you know, you have to contrast this to Parkland, of course, where the school resource officer seemed to let the students down. He stood his ground and decided not to enter the school. But if Republicans are going to offer that as their alternative to gun control measures, I think we could meet them halfway with that if they're willing to give up some concessions of their own.
Let's assume we agreed in principle that we don't want to arm teachers, but we want to put armed police officers in schools. How do you deal with that from a practical perspective in all of the more rural school districts who just don't have an extra officer that can be assigned to the school?
Yeah.
Who pays for it?
It's certainly tough if you have a school of, say, 100 students. I don't know if you'd be able to do that. Maybe you'd have to find a certain cap. Like if the school has 500 plus students and it's in a community with 10,000 residents, you can afford to assign one officer to the school.
Who can afford, though, is the question, right? Because all we ever hear about is the town can't afford teachers, the town can't afford more police officers, the town can't afford school supplies. So then you say, well, do we have the money for this? And then the counter argument will be, we always have money for school safety, don't we?
Certainly now it's under the purview of like a local community to hire the police or the police officer. But if we're talking about gun control measures at a federal level, as we are right now, I guess we could delegate funds to smaller communities and it could be paid for in that way. I just feel like this is something that could be effective. If you do have school resource officers, maybe even going as far as having like metal detectors at some of these schools.
Oh boy.
But I understand that's not a very popular position on the left.
What are the arguments against school police officers? Well, one of the big ones that we hear is you're basically creating an environment where from a very young age, every kid is just understanding that the world they live in is so dangerous that they need an armed cop with them at the school. If you go to Mean World Syndrome, which is one of the more interesting documentaries about the effect of violence in media, in news media and video games and movies, it's not that it makes people violent, it's that it makes people fear that they will be the victims of violence. And that can have really long-lasting effects. So I don't know, is it just a question of math? Is it like, well, listen, here's the probability of a school shooting, and here's the effect of having every kid in school be really afraid in the real world because of the fact that we've placed armed police in every single school. I don't know how you calculate it. I don't know what the answer is, but I understand that concern.
Yeah, I mean, like if I understand that mass shootings and school shootings are statistically insignificant because they are so rare and they happen so few and far between. But it's not as if that would be the only job responsibility of a resource officer to stop one. Like they can do plenty of other things, especially when you talk about in high schools, you know, policing the drugs that are going on in the schools or breaking up fights. I mean, most schools nowadays, at least in my experience, would have a cop there, and you know that seems like a pretty normal thing.
I think that what you're referring to is similar to that DARE program, Drug Abuse Resistance Education, which has been widely shown not to be a good program. And having, you know, the idea that the police officer in school is good because not only can they defend from shootings, they can also police drug use. I think that's a disaster. That's the school to prison pipeline in a nutshell. I think that's horrible.
All right. Well, if you have like, okay, so let's say you have like a gathering of, I think maybe 100 people.
Okay.
There's some fair going on.
Right.
You want to have a police officer there. That's generally the law, that if you have some sort of gathering with more than X amount of people,
gotta have a
someone
cop.
has to be assigned there. A lot of these schools have hundreds, if not 1,000, 2,000 people. I think it makes perfect sense to assign one resource officer to that school. And yes, it can go beyond drugs. It can also be, just breaking up fights or.
Are there that
there,
many
there are
fights?
plenty of
I'm
responsibilities that an officer can take, and it's a resource for a student to go to if they're having a problem at home, if they're having a problem with a teacher. Like, I think that makes sense to have one there.
Are the police officers equipped to deal with problems at home? I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just asking the question. I can assure
Are
you.
coaches? I mean, are
Yeah.
teachers?
Teachers, I think maybe are. I can assure you that the resource officer that was having sex with a student at my high school was not the guy to go to if you were having problems at home. That I can assure you.
Well,
Hopefully, they
that's-
were. Some of them were better than him. I would hope.
he's a bad apple.
He's a bad apple, yeah. Electronic cigarettes are very dangerous, not only because they pose health concerns from the use itself, but because they can explode. There's actually been a death that has been attributed to an exploding electronic cigarette, according to an autopsy, which determined that, I believe the name is pronounced Talmadge Deella, 38 years old, died a couple weeks ago because parts of an electronic cigarette exploded and penetrated his head, and his body was found inside of a home in Florida. Why am I not surprised that it's Florida? That was on fire. I mean, this is just a horrible, horrible thing. And I've been advocating against these electronic cigarettes for a long time. I think that people unknowingly consume way more than with physical cigarettes. I question how much of a bridge to getting off of smoking altogether the e-cigs are. I think it's an absolute train wreck. And here's another example of the dangers of the e-cig. The thing can explode and kill you.
Yeah, I guess so. It's only happened once so far, but
That
I
we know
imagine it can happen again. The danger is because of it uses a lithium-ion battery.
Yeah.
And so the same sort of thing can happen with cell phones, like the Samsung case from last year, or even with laptops. But the difference between cell phones and laptops and an e-cigarette is that you put one in your mouth.
Right.
So if the thing explodes, that's a lot more dangerous.
You don't put your cell phone in your mouth? That's weird.
Well, actually, if I have to like go through my pockets and grab something,
Exactly.
you got to put the cell phone in the mouth. But I mean, that's few and far between.
Stay off the e-cigs is the message, right? I mean, there's not much more of an analysis to do. It was a freak accident. It's horrible, but it's just yet another reason to stay off of smoking. I
Well, do
think.
you believe it's a safer alternative than smoking traditional cigarettes? I think the case is pretty clear that it is.
No, like I said, I don't
Yeah.
think it is, because people consume way more, and there's no real equivalent between one cigarette and some amount of usage of an e-cig. So from what I've read, people
Yeah.
end up using it a ton, and it's quite unhealthy. Although I guess it doesn't have tar and some of those other chemicals.
Yeah, but
It's bad.
It does have those chemicals though to flavor.
Yeah, which
so,
aren't good.
Yeah, not a very good thing.
Just don't do it. Don't do it. Okay, there is. We talked on the program today with Travis Lupick about how when you do decriminalization versus legalization, you often leave almost entirely intact the black market for a drug, right? Removing criminal penalties and making them civil doesn't mean that the drug is regulated, and it still has that black market infrastructure around it. And what we are now learning is that in some places, even with legalization, the marijuana black market is remaining, except it's more open, and you see sort of an indifference from law enforcement to attack it. So this requires sort of a thinking through sequentially. You've got marijuana is illegal. So you've got a black market for it, right? It's being produced and sold illegally in the black market. And because it's illegal, efforts are made to keep the production, harvest, and sale of the marijuana under wraps, secret to the extent that that's possible. When you legalize, you do create a formal market, a legal market for marijuana, and you've got dispensaries, and you've got regulation, and you've got taxation, and if it's medical marijuana, you've got medical marijuana cards, whatever. And that hurts the black market significantly. But what we're finding out is a sort of sometimes a chain reaction effect, is that because of the legalization, oftentimes the penalties for unlicensed harvest and growth of marijuana become not quite as bad. And what it's leading to is sort of more audacity on the part of some of the marijuana growers to expand their operations and to not be as concerned about keeping them completely secret. Now, it's anecdotal. This is something that has been seen anecdotally in Washington state, and that the idea of offering a cheaper product, because if you can do it untaxed, right, the black market marijuana will still be cheaper than the legal market marijuana. You don't eliminate the black market. But to this, I would say, nobody said you eliminate it completely. Cigarettes are legal. There's still a black market for cigarettes where they're brought from low tax states into high tax states to circumvent the taxation that makes a pack of cigarettes, I think, as much as like $12 or $15 in New York State, for example. So I don't think that a total elimination of the black market was ever the expected thing, but you really do hurt it.
Yeah, it certainly makes sense that the black market still exists because it's legal in Washington, but it's not legal in plenty of other states. So
Sure.
they could grow it in Washington and then sell it in Oregon or Idaho or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think, if we wanted to at least move in the direction of eliminating the black market, you would make it legal across the entire country.
Sure.
And it would still exist, right, because you want to get around certain standards, and I'm sure there would still be profit to be made selling it in the black market and maybe smuggling it outside of the country, but you would certainly lessen the significance of that.
Yeah, I think that some of the reporting around this has been fairly unremarkable. Like, yeah, you don't eliminate it, but you do restrict it significantly. And, as far as people becoming very audacious and saying now that it's legal, we'll go from growing X amount in an underground, not literally underground, but in a sort of black site, I don't even know what you would call it, a secret location, to being a little more loose and growing 10x that amount or something like that. Well, you're putting yourself at risk. That's also not the smartest thing to be doing.
Yeah.
So I'm just not, the net effect of this legalization that we've seen in a number of states has been on the net incredibly positive.
Do you think this is like a problem in principle? I mean, of course you are breaking the law and you're putting yourself in danger perhaps by doing this, but like it doesn't strike me as if these are bad people by doing this necessarily.
No, I would not say that they're bad people. I don't know them. They could be bad people, but it could have nothing. They might be homophobic and against abortion. That would be much worse than growing pot. I dislike them more for that.
This was a very drug-focused show today. We had Travis Lupick on for our interview, and then all 3 bonus show stories in one way or another ended up, we talked about drugs. Like, I don't know how that happened.
Yeah, you seem a little bit
I'm shaken up by that.
By it.
I don't like that.
Okay, well, listen, important stories, very, very relevant. I thought that the Travis Lupick interview, by the way, was very good, although it took him a little bit to kind of become more comfortable, I think.
That happens.
But I thought that the material was good.
That's like me every day.
Yeah, right, that's right. Pat's not comfortable until the 3rd story of the bonus show. Okay, that's it for today. New show tomorrow. Full week next week. Memorial Day Monday, we will be off the following week. I will be in Montreal, Canada, practicing my French.
Oh, it's news to me.
Okay, I've only mentioned it like 8 or 10 times, so I am, Pat clearly wasn't listening that day. Okay, we'll talk to you tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.